Hello and welcome to another episode of TOG Chat. I'm Robert Osborne, principal of the Osborne Group, and as always, I'm joined by my colleague Laurel McCombs. How are you, Laurel?
I'm good. How are you, Bob?
I'm doing okay. I'm glad spring is starting to sprung around here, so sort of. So, but it's heading in the right direction. So, I am doing well. So I thought today, you and I were talking, and we thought it might be good to revisit one of our old favorites, or maybe two old favorites that are related, and that is both vision and strategic planning, because it feels like it's been coming up a lot in my life lately when talking to clients, when talking to some of the organizations that I volunteer for, and it just feels so fundamental to having strong fundraising and to just operating well as an organization.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it has been coming up for me as well. I'm kind of in the midst or getting started on a handful of strategic planning projects. So obviously, vision and strategic planning so tied together, as you said, and so I've been thinking about it a lot, but also I think been thinking about it a lot as it relates to motivation in a world that can be hard to find motivation in
Okay.
sometimes. So we'll maybe touch on that
I'm
today.
interested in
But
I'm
but
interested in
would
hearing that.
would love to hear how it's been popping up for you.
Yeah, so I think it's been popping up a lot because I think it's one of those. So I've been doing a lot of strategic planning, so that's one of the reasons that it's been popping up. And then been doing a lot of campaign work, so that's another reason I think that it's been popping up. And so maybe it would be helpful for us to define what we mean by vision to start off with, because I think it's one of those words that gets used a lot in different ways in different contexts. So when we're talking about vision from like a fundraising development sense, I think what we're talking about is like, what is the world we're trying to create, not 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, but really over the next few years, really the length of a strategic plan. So like, what is our vision for our organization in terms of mission implementation over the next 3 to 5 years? What outcomes can we expect? And why are we doing the things that we're doing? And so you can call it whatever you like, but when we think about it, that's really what we're thinking about is like, in other words, if I give you this large amount of money, what is going to be different in the world? And it answers that really fundamental question in a way that when you don't have a clear vision, it's much harder to get people engaged and enrolled.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to distinguish between the way we talk about a vision versus a vision statement.
Mm,
I have most organizations have a mission statement and the vision statement. And when we go in and start talking about vision, a lot of times folks will be like, "Oh no, we have a vision," and they'll hand you this like two-sentence vision statement that's usually something to your point that's like 20, 30, maybe never. Like big, or it's oftentimes too, I feel like organizations in an attempt to have a vision that encompasses all potential inevitabilities have these like really vague statements that are like, we hope that people in our community will thrive, and it's like, well, what people, and what does thriving mean to you, right? Like, and so again, I think I'm glad you made the distinction, because it you know I think most vision statements aren't very good. I think
useless
they
usually.
don't say anything, they don't serve a purpose in any way. I think they were just something that kind of came into vogue like in like the late 90s, early aughts, and everybody felt like they had to have one. And but they're also not, yeah, not what we're talking about today.
Yeah. And my other favorite is will be the premier whatever organization, which again tells you very, very little. So yeah, so we're really talking about like you have your mission is broad, it goes on for a long time. Your vision really is what are you specifically doing to implement your mission over the next few years, usually the length of a strategic plan, and what outcomes can we expect. And it sounds simple, but I think people have a lot of trouble with this. And even when they don't have trouble with it, they don't actually use it, I would say, in a useful sort of way. So maybe let's tackle the having trouble with it part of it. Uh, and I think it's one of those things like once you kind of get it, you get it, and then you can kind of go on forever. But I would say, I know a lot of smart people and a lot of really accomplished organizations that have a lot of trouble with this for whatever reason, because I think we're not necessarily taught to be thinking about, specific outcomes. I think we're usually taught to think about our mission, right? Like we are trying to help children from this neighborhood or this populace, get a better education, or we are trying to, stop climate change or whatever it is, like some very broad and worthwhile things that are not necessarily, um, specific enough for me to get tell me anything, right? Or tell me about the work that it is that you're doing. And I always kind of cite the example of myself saying like I have a lot of interests. I'm very interested in education. I'm interested in equity in a broad sort of way. I am interested in the environment. I like cats and animals. There's lots of causes that I could be made to be excited about. And it's not really the mission that's going to get me excited, right? Because just in those 4 or 5 categories that I've just named, there's probably 10,000 different, organizations that deal with them. And if you want to narrow it down, even in my community, there's probably hundreds, so as long as you're talking about just mission, right, you're not really distinguishing yourself from many, many other organizations. And it doesn't tell me what I'm really investing in a way that is going to be compelling and make me really kind of reach deep into those pockets and give you that big donation. But if we have a vision, if we have like here's specific outcomes that we are trying to achieve within an achievable period of time, right? Then I know that I'm investing in something specific. I'm investing in a specific outcome. And those are the organizations that I'm going to want to support, not the organizations whose missions I support. That's where it starts, but the organization that is promising me change in some way.
Yeah, that's such an interesting way to think about it, that in a lot of ways, mission kind of narrows down the pool from like every nonprofit to this set of nonprofits, but then vision is then the thing that can really kind of be the driving factor between, okay, so of all of these, which are really kind of helping to see the change in the world that I'm looking to see, not just do the thing that's important to me, but is actually, kind of having the impact that I want to see. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know about you, but I just find people it's can be challenging for people. And what I try to do is one is just let people know like this can be hard. If you haven't been thinking about, your work in this way, it can be hard to think about it that way. And even if you understand it, sometimes it can be hard to get the whole organization kind of thinking about like what do we mean by vision, and how do we express that vision. And it can be hard, I think, if your executive director or your CEO isn't thinking that that way. And so, yeah, I wonder how you sort of deal with a challenge with your clients of kind of pulling that vision out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that is compounding the challenge, like this is always challenging, but in the last, it feels like forever years, in the last 5 years, right, there's been, so much change and so much uncertainty at a level that I don't know that we've experienced since, the economic downturn in 0708, right? And it has lasted so much longer, right? Like that was such a finite period of time. It was terrible, but we got through it and came out of it, right? But now it just feels like this kind of unending feeling of uncertainty. And I think that's been another challenge, because people are like, Laurel, how am I supposed to tell you what we're going to accomplish in 3 years when I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? And I think that's been the other, that's, I hear that a lot from folks, and I hear it, I get it. But at the same time, it is because of that I think it becomes even more important, right, to establish the vision. Like it's the counterintuitive, like in uncertainty, we need to have a vision more than ever. And I was giving this example actually at a board retreat just the other day. I was like, if I'm a basketball, because I always think about the word pivot. And whenever I hear the word pivot, I always think about basketball. So I was, so if I'm a basketball player and, like I think I'm going to take this path, but then somebody comes in front of me and I've got to pivot, right, and go this way. And then, oh, somebody else got in my way. So now I've got to pivot and go this way. If I didn't ultimately have the hoop as
Hmm.
my goal, right? If I didn't know that ultimately where I need to get, regardless of how many times I have to pivot, I have to get it in the hoop, like I might end up in the parking lot, right? Like, so, I think about our vision as like the basketball hoop, right? Like this is, regardless of where I have to go, regardless of how I have to adjust to counterbalance the uncertainty and to counterbalance the things that we didn't expect that are going to happen. I can make those decisions and I can pivot and I can adjust in a way that still gets me to the end goal, right? And so, I often, try to help people see that that vision isn't just some, pie in the sky, fuzzy, like touchy feely, lovey. Oh, wouldn't it? Oh, we want a better world, right? But it is your roadmap. It is your North Star, right? And so in some ways, I think it's helpful to like try to get everything out of the way about what might happen between now and then. Like, I think we have to acknowledge that none of us know what's going to happen between now and 3 to 5 years from now, right? But what won't change is that we want to get to a certain place with our organization and that we're going to be committed to getting there no matter what changes, right? And so I do often ask folks to, I always joke that I'm the daughter of a psychotherapist. And so I make people visualize all the time. And so I'm always like, visualization, like close your eyes. I don't actually make people close their eyes if they don't want to, but I often, will say like, close your eyes and picture this organization 3 years from now. And it is, as I always say, aspirational, but realistically, the, you know, doing all the things that it can do, and write it down, right? And I'll make people write little post-its, right? But here, what do you see? What are you hearing? What are you feeling? What is the organization experiencing that's different? Because I want people to get out of the like, oh, but what if this happens, or but what if this happens? And instead, I want them to very first kind of picture like, what are we achieving in 3 years, and then let's work backwards to figure out how we get there. So
Well, I love the basketball analogy, and it's March, so it's very appropriate. And I'm going to use that. I like that because usually I think about it with the specific groups. Like we work with some election groups. And I'm like, win or lose the election, you're still heading in the same direction, right? You still want the same things that you want. But I like the basketball because it's kind of universal, right? Like, yeah, you still want to get that score that basket, and you may have to you know, shoot some threes, shoot a three, you're pass it around the perimeter, whatever it is. But you still want to get the ball on the hoop, and that doesn't change no matter like what defense is being played. And I'm getting too nerdy about the basketball,
well, and
but
like I'm so timely, right? Like March
yeah,
Madness, and
Mitch
yeah, like
Madness.
we're
It's exactly the right analogy. Yeah, and I think all that makes a lot of sense. And I think people when they kind of hear it, they understand it. I think, like you do have to tell people ultimately, right, that what it is that they're investing in. And it has to be sort of a specific it has to be specific enough that I can understand it. And I'm like, okay, this is the outcome that this investment, this donation is going to make. And without that, it's hard for me to, as a donor, to make a big investment, right? If I kind of vaguely know you're going to do something good, great. I'm going to make a certain level of investment. If I know like these are the outcomes you're specifically trying to achieve, then I'm thinking about you in a different sort of way. And I tell our clients that this fundraising, and particularly major gift fundraising, it's a marketplace. You're competing with other priorities, you're competing with other organizations, and you really need to let people know how their money is going to be, what difference it's actually going to make. And the more specific you can be about that, the more likely they are to make a larger investment on who you are. And I would say too, it's speaking of strategic planning, it's very hard to strategic plan, I think, without having a vision, because otherwise, if you don't know where you're going, to your point, like, right, you may end up in the parking lot. If you don't have that to kind of tie everything together, you don't really have that lens that you need to evaluate, well, should we do this or should we do that? Or should we invest in this or should we invest in that? Or should we build capacity here or capacity there? Without that, it's right. It's just kind of arbitrary, right? Or just what I feel like doing, or like whatever the culture sort of supports in terms of your decision making. But it's not going to be strategic. You'll do stuff, and it's probably do good stuff, but it's not going to be as strategic as it otherwise could be.
Yeah, it is the, and I think about like kind of the juxtaposition of mission and vision. Mission is so important. And this is not to minimize the importance of our missions, right? They're the core of who we are and what we do. But there's a lot of so what with mission, right? Like there's a lot of, like we're gonna, and I'll say I worked for years and years at Big Brothers Big Sisters, and like, oh, we're gonna match X number of kids in mentoring relationships. So what? Like if I'm not steeped in the research,
Mhm.
why is that better than them going to Boys and Girls Club after school? Why is that better than them joining a Girl Scout troop? Why is that better? Or so if I'm a donor, you just telling me what you do, I mean, it's nice, and I can look at pictures and I can say, oh, that's nice. But in terms of making a big investment versus to you versus to another organization, okay, so what, right? And vision is really the answer to so what, right? Because this is, to if we do this, then it will accomplish this. And I think again, I know there's a roadblock for folks in terms of vision of not wanting to commit to particular outcomes that they may not be able to fulfill. We see this in campaign planning all the time too, right? Like this, like feeling uneasy about committing to a public number, right? That is associated with like a set of outcomes. But at some point, again, if you don't have that roadmap, then you're not working toward anything. And so who's to say that you like what's worse, like setting a goal and then either having to adjust the goal as you go along and review the progress to the goal and try to get there, or have no goal and to your point just be like doing things and hoping that they're accomplishing something, right? And I said to a client the other day, we were talking about kind of just doing fundraising without a plan, and I was like, look, it's really easy to throw spaghetti at a wall, it's a bitch to clean it off. Like so let's like let's like be let's stop throwing spaghetti at the wall.
I like it. It's another good analogy. You're on a roll today. Yeah, no, I think all of that is 100% true. And I think even when we have a vision, we don't always use it. So I think we tend to default to like our methodology and our history. Like, so even when we kind of know where we're going, we still tend to be the first thing we tend to talk about is we've been doing this for a long time and we're really good at it. And none of which, to your who cares point, like I don't care how good you are at something and how long you've been doing it if I don't know what you're doing in the first place, like what you're trying, the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And so it is important to be credible, and it is important to have, a methodology that's effective, but all of that is kind of subservient. It's supporting information for your vision. Whereas your vision is the big outcomes that you're trying to achieve, your big why. And then once I'm excited about, yes, I want the world that you're describing too. I want those outcomes. I want the world to look the way you want it to look. Then I'm interested in, okay, well now tell me how you're going to do it and why you, and all of those, and those other questions that are also important before people are going to make a serious investment in your organization. But if I'm just saying like we're really, really good at something, like I'm working with a client right now that's saying that like we're really, really good at this. There's a big problem, and we're kind of good at solving the problem without really saying how they're going to solve it and even with what they're going to solve it. It's just sort of like we've identified this big problem, that I think many people have identified the problem that they've identified without actually talking about like, well, okay, well, what's going to be different? Like, what are you proposing will be different? So I think even when we kind of understand this, we don't always use it. Like if I go to a client's website, am I going to see like a lot of like just information, or am I going to see what you're trying to achieve out there in the world today, and the vision? If I read your proposals, am I going to kind of hear about a project, or somewhere in there is there going to be a headline about the bigger idea that you're trying to achieve? If you walk into a room as a fundraiser, as an executive director, as a board member, do you walk in and say, I'm the executive director of wherever, I've been here for X number of years, blah, blah, blah? Or do you walk in and do you say, hey, I'm the executive director of wherever, and I have this vision for our children, or this vision for America, or this vision for our democracy, or whatever it might be. And so I think, yeah, I think we are afraid on some level. I think, and that's what you were sort of hinting at a little bit, like that uncertainty. Like we're kind of afraid to talk about vision. I think you're right, because people are worried to committing to change, and maybe there's even like it feels corny maybe to people in a weird way too.
I do think there's this perception of vision as like the warm fuzzy side. And I think like, well, no, right? Like, because ultimately I have to, in all of the talk, about the nonprofit industrial complex, right? Like, I think we have to acknowledge that there are a lot of organizations out there that exist for potentially no real reason, right? And may or may not be executing on their missions, may or may not be executing on any number of things, may be executing on their mission but not actually
Hmm.
accomplishing very much. And this is the problem, right? Because we like, what is the point of doing something if that isn't changing anything, right? And so we have to be committed if we're going to go out into the world and say to people, we're the ones who are making a difference. Like we're the ones who are really gonna impact and solve the problem, right? We have to back that up by saying, and here's what's going to be different when we do that. And this is all tied to something else that's been coming up a lot lately for me, which is theory of change. And we could talk all day about theory of change too, but like we have to know, right, that there's a need, that we have some particular secret sauce, right, that we've developed that we believe is the way to address that need, and that this is going to be the result, right? And if we don't have all parts of that, right, if we can't explain the need, then there's no reason for us to exist. If we can't tell people what we do, then we lose credibility. And if we can't tell people what's going to be different, how that need is going to be impacted because we did what we did, then how do we know that our secret sauce is so good, right? And so again, I think so many of these things are created because funders want them, right? Like so many
Yep.
people create a theory of change or a logic model or a vision because a funder has asked for it. And I think, can we stop? Can we stop doing that? Because yeah, we need this for funders, but more importantly, like we need this to prove that our own organization needs to exist, right? It's like a very existential question of like, is what we're doing actually doing the thing we think it's doing? And if I don't have a vision for where we're going, and again, there's probably lots of, and I know it is a small number, right? But there are probably plenty of organizations that purposefully don't want to have a vision because they don't want to be beholden to having to achieve anything in particular, right? So don't be one of those organizations.
Don't be Don't be one of those organizations. Well, I think that is a good note to end on. And
Well,
we'll,
and I will
yeah,
say one more thing, Bob, which is, we talk about this a lot, and it's hard right now. Like we're talking to people every day, and you and I both personally, like we're all struggling every day right now. Like it's a slog sometimes, to get up and get through this. And the work that a lot of our clients and other organizations in the nonprofit sector, like this work is hard. This is not easy work, and it is even harder right now. And if you're just focused on the day-to-day work, right, it can feel impossible and it can feel miserable some days. And I think this is the other benefit of having a vision, right? Because you and your staff and your board and your volunteers and your donors, like everyone needs that reminder of like, yes, the work is really hard today and it feels like we just want to give up on the work sometimes, but look at where we're going. Like this is where we're going, right? And so just as a culture piece, just as like a motivator for all of us to just keep doing the work that is hard, but really is really, really important. Like vision is just so, so important to that. So just want to make that note.
no, I think that's a great note to end on. I mean, it's galvanizing, right, for an organization, and yeah, no matter what the world throws at you, you still have this North Star that you're moving towards. And I think that helps. I agree with you. I think that helps quite a bit. Well, thank you once again, Laurel, for a good conversation. As always, if you need help with your visioning or strategic planning, you can always contact us at mail at the osborngroup.com, or you can head over to the website, which since you're listening to this, you presumably have found. You can fill in the contact form there as well. But until the next episode in a few weeks, we'll say goodbye.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.